Hey there drone fans, Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I interview Brendan Schulman, the Vice President of Policy and Legal Affairs for DJI. I was lucky enough to catch up with Brendan this week at the DJI launch event in New York City for the brand new Osmo Pocket. Now we had a chance to chat on a wide range of topics that included the new DJI Geo 2.0 system, no-fly zones, and what the new FAA reauthorization bill means for our hobby. Now, Brendan has a team of experts that are involved in every regulatory conversation that takes place at the federal, state, and local level, and they're huge advocates for our hobby. They're flyers themselves, so they're constantly in those tricky conversations around how do we regulate something without stifling innovation and creativity. So I think they've got a real good handle on exactly what's going on at all three levels, and the conversation was really enlightening for me as well because he's plugged in where all these decisions are being made. So when he says something, I'm listening very intently because he's giving me a lot of information about where the hobby's heading. And I feel like having somebody like him and his team out there advocating for us is a really good thing because we all know that drones are sort of a brand new thing for the public and a lot of local regulations are being put in place to sort of stifle our ability to fly. Having advocates like this in those conversations on our behalf, I think really helps the industry. So I tried to work in as many of the tricky questions you guys sent me as well, and I think he did a really good job in answering them. So I'll run the interview now and you can see for yourself. Hey there drone fans, Rick here again. I'm with Brendan Schulman, Vice President of Policy and Legal Affairs for DJI. Now I know a lot of you guys have been asking me on the channel about the Geo 2.0 expansion of the NFZs, and I come out pretty favorable about NFZs. I think they're a good thing to have in your quads because if you're flying to an area where an NFZ is activated, you're flying into an area you shouldn't be in. So I like the fact that it warns me when I'm on the edge of an NFZ. I don't want to violate the law, I want to make sure that I'm flying safe. But I think that with the 2.0 version, if I'm not mistaken, you're using a much more accurate mapping now. So there may seem like some areas are expanded, but other areas are actually tighter. So it's sort of a give and take, is that true?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it an expansion. I think it's a refinement and an upgrade because it really focuses on the areas of airspace that are highest risk for a drone to be in. So previously our technology really was a point and a circle around an airport, which actually was inspired by the legislation from Congress in 2012, which talked about 5-mile notification from airports. What we realized on our own and also in talking to our partners in the aviation world is that that really doesn't reflect the actual risk of a collision at an airport. The collision risk really is into and out of the runways. So we haven't really expanded the system as much as we've refined it, and if you look closely you'll see that yes, on approach into the runway there's a longer three-dimensional protected airspace now on the Geo 2.0 system, but to the side of the runways there's much more flexibility.
It's in tighter, yeah, I've noticed that.
And you can self-unlock closer to the runway if you're not in the path of the oncoming air traffic. So we think it's a smarter way to do geofencing.
I totally agree, and I think that X you see on top of the runway, or it's on top of the airport, and that's where the planes are going to be, right? So you'd want to be very careful when you're flying in that area. Now, I know a lot of people push back and they say, look, you know, I'm an American, I bought it, I should be able to fly it anywhere I want to fly it. And I get that, I understand that spirit, but for me, I think you guys are taking the extra step. You spend a lot of time and money developing the NFZ technology and building in those geo-fencing and such, and I think that's a wonderful thing to keep people safe. I would recommend, again, that the other guys aren't necessarily less inspired, they're just a little bit lazier, quite honestly, because there's a lot of work in building that in, right? That's not an easy thing to do.
It's taken a tremendous amount of time and effort, both from a sort of policy department perspective and also on the technology side. This is the third time we've had a version of geofencing. There was the initial simple system, then there was the live system, which was an effort to address, for example, temporary restrictions, stadiums. We had a lot of people back then who were flying at stadiums when there wasn't a game. So we realized the restriction at the stadiums were during the time of major league games. We needed a live system, and so we changed that 2 years ago. This is the evolution of it, and it's really reflects principles that the International Civil Aviation Organization and the FAA have articulated about how to protect those airports. And I think it's really important. The reason we're doing that investment is it's really important to be proactive and have industry-led efforts to help keep the airspace safe. Otherwise, we're going to end up with more regulation, more of an overreaction from the policymakers who think that the industry itself is not concerned or doing anything about safety.
Right, and I suffer through that in New Jersey, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but we've had draconian laws implemented on beaches and parks because the local communities are afraid of drones. They're not sure what they're doing. They're viewing it sort of as a Wild West, so they put these big laws in place to say no drone flying in the area. what I like so much about you guys is that you're not only building the technology, but you're involved with the FAA and the civil authorities, and you're in consultation with them, trying to find some even balance between too much regulation and not enough regulation. And that's a very positive thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We really are, we're not opposed to regulation, but it's got to be smart. It has to address risks, whether they're safety or security or privacy, and then we can get behind it. So we really are engaged at all levels of government in the United States and internationally. So we actually have a team of 9 people, professionals around the world, who are working with the government on everything from aviation regulations to state proposals on how to regulate drones. And in many ways, we're really on your side. Like we are advocates for our end users. We want you to use the products safely.
That's why I grabbed you. I saw you across the room. I'm like, I got to get you on the camera to answer the questions. Yeah, because I'm a fan of the company.
Look, many of us are enthusiasts. Like that might. Yeah, that's right. I've been flying for like 25 years at this point.
Exactly.
So our interest is in making sure that you have an easy barrier to entry and access to airspace. Fewer restrictions, at least the ones that don't make sense, and costs of operating. So whether it's remote ID or geofencing or the recent FAA legislation or state and local, we've done a lot at the state level and in dozens of states.
I did want to ask you about that. So one of the things I want to finish with is your commitment to that type of help, because in New Jersey we had a lot of sort of patchwork laws all over the place where I'd go to a beach to fly in the middle of now in the wintertime, and it's me and 2 seagulls, but there's a law banning me from flying there. So I've worked with Node, which I know you're a big supporter of, right?
Yes.
If you guys haven't looked them up, Node, N-O-D-E, is a wonderful organization. But in New Jersey, they've been so effective now that they've rescinded basically all those local patchwork laws, pulled it back to the state to say only the FAA-approved NFZs are official, which means I can now fly on that beach, which is wonderful.
Yeah, so what we've seen is a trend at the state level, and we've been big supporters of this in individual states, is to consolidate the regulation, the authority for regulating drones at the state level.
I agree.
Where there tends to be sort of a more deliberate process, more information, more expertise on everything.
Excellent.
And so New Jersey has a bill in the past year or so that says that the cities and counties and municipalities don't regulate drones. It's at the state level. We've seen that now in I think 12 or 15 states.
Yeah, Florida's done it as well.
Florida, Texas, Virginia, Arizona. There's a fairly lengthy list at this point, covering about 50% of the U.S. population.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so about half of the people flying out there are subject to, if needed and if warranted, state-level regulation and, of course, federal. So we think, at least for now, while people are still understanding how drones are used and what regulation is even needed, we need to keep this sort of higher level until we figure out, what needs to be solved. I think, for example, remote ID, which we know is coming from the FAA, and which we've already
through that. Yeah, I think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing.
It's not only a good thing; it's going to solve some of these local concerns about who's flying, why are they flying, are they authorized to be here?
It's a license plate.
It's like a license plate. So when we have that in place, the need for hyper-local regulation or restrictions goes away because now you can enforce, for example, a privacy law that's already on the books statewide. So we think that's the smart way to regulate the technology.
Excellent. All right, so this is all good news. And again, I wanted to make sure you guys got the details because he's the guy working hard for our rights as flyers. And like I say to you guys every time when you give me a hard time about NFZs, if you're flying safe, you got nothing to worry about. So just hang in there.
And can I say one more thing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So we're not, the geofencing is there as an extra step to flying, right? We are not deciding where you can fly. No. We're not trying to get in the way of people with authority to do so. In sensitive areas like those runway approach paths, nuclear power plants and prisons where most people are not typically flying, there's an extra step. But when you need to fly there, when you have authority, there are many ways to get it. Some of the parts of the system are self-authorized, self-unlocking. We now have, for those that aren't, that are most restricted, like those runways, there's the online webpage. You submit the form. We are now under 30 minutes response time worldwide for those requests. And in many cases, within like 3 minutes, I've seen people approved. So we're constantly evolving the system so that
everything you can to make it easy.
We want you to fly. We want you to use the equipment to its utmost potential, but we have to balance that with really serious safety and security concerns that policymakers have, and aviation authorities, and airlines, and airports. We just have to do that. But if you're authorized to fly and you contact us and you plan your mission, and these areas you're always going to plan ahead. You're not
Right.
going to show up at the nuclear
it's
plant
rare. No,
to inspect it.
no.
So contact us a little bit in advance, and you can fly. We're not trying to impede your operation.
Great. Okay. I like it. I know it sounds crazy, but I like the fact that when I put it up, I know that if I'm in an area that I didn't anticipate there was going to be an issue, I get a warning. So I think it's a safe thing. So
you.
thanks an awful lot for taking the time to talk to me today.
welcome.
Hope you guys enjoyed this. And Brendan, thanks again.
Thank you.
Good talking to you.
You too.